All right, everyone. We are back. A lot has happened since we had our last Genius Call. We're so excited to bring together the first in a really steady lineup of Genius Calls for October and November. Since last we met, we launched our incubator and the Builders Club. We have a lot of wonderful things going on under the hood. And, that's not why we're here today. I'm really excited to bring on our guest. Before we begin, I just want to make sure I give the shout out to the team, Club CPG, that makes it all happen in the community. Thank you so much, Janet and Chad. We're also honored to have the Admit One crowd here and the pre-mint community. So without further ado, we're going to add in gmoney. So let's get to the fireside chat. gmoney, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Mikey, how are you? Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
The privilege is all ours. And, we've got such a wide array of things to cover. We're going to probably just dive in on your origin story. I think some of us have heard it. I know I've been doing a deep dive, as I told you, on it. But I would love to get your take on where this started for you, and where you really had that light bulb moment of what you were going to do with your community.
You're talking what part exactly where it started? NFTs, crypto?
Yeah, NFTs I think is probably the right insertion point. But if you want to go back
cool.
earlier, for sure.
Well, we can start with NFTs. So I've been involved in crypto since 2017. I found NFTs in late August, early September of 2020. And when I found them, they immediately started to make sense to me because the first day of quarantine in 2020, I hadn't played a video game in over 10 years. I started, I bought a PlayStation. I started playing Fortnite, and I started playing with two of my best friends. One of them has a nephew who's 12 years old in Texas, and the first thing he asked me is, "What skins did you buy?" And I'm like, "Skins? Like, that's like they don't give me any special powers. Why am I going to buy any skins?" And I fast forward, 2 or 3 weeks, I'm buying a bunch of skins. And I realized right then and there that there's this massive super cycle, right? Where that kid is 12 years old today. In 10 years, he's going to, have his own income, and he's going to be totally okay with owning a purely digital asset, right? And so I'm like, okay, there's this massive super cycle that's coming where that kid's going to be okay with owning something that's not physical. How do I take advantage of that now? And, at the time, I was trading equities. And this is in March of 2020, so the market's going crazy. But Unity is not a publicly traded stock at this point. Roblox is not publicly traded. Metaverse is not a theme that investors are talking about at this point. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to keep an eye out for it. And when I started going back down the crypto rabbit hole in starting around that time in March of 2020, but then kind of learning all the DeFi mechanisms and all DeFi summer that was going on that year, I stumbled upon NFTs as the summer came to an end. And I'm like, this is your skin on Twitter. This is your skin on Discord, on Telegram. And so then I just start really going down that rabbit hole, right? Because I'm like, all right, the cool thing is, right, like I see these things are valuable because I see how kids are interacting with them in these video games. But the interesting concept, the added twist was, now you have provable scarcity, right? And it's like, what does that mean for the value of these assets long term? And that's really, that was it. It just clicked, and I started going down the rabbit hole. Over the next few months, I was buying, buying sweeping floors in a bunch of projects, and it culminated in me buying my CryptoPunk ape and writing a Twitter thread on it in January of 2021.
The ape CryptoPunk. I mean, I love the pseudonymity that you're bringing here. It's iconic. It's a hell of a punk. Can you talk a little bit about like what your feelings were at the kind of in the lead up to and in the purchase of your punk, and like how that feeling, I think, influences us a lot. Like I think in your manifesto you talk about like feelings are always going to be the same for all of these super cycles. Can you talk a bit about your specific feelings on that punk, like before, during, and after?
You're saying like when what made me want to purchase it?
What made you want to purchase it? But I think we've also been talking a lot in Web3 about how the user experience is like just shady and sometimes needs a great improvement, and how that experience kind of influences where you feel about the market now. But yeah, the specific, like what you gravitated towards with the punk, and then any details
Yeah,
you can share about it.
cool. So, when I look at, and when I was especially initially when I was looking at NFTs, right? It helps understanding my framework of how I look at crypto in general, right? So it's like one of the things that attracted me to crypto was that it I considered it an option that doesn't expire, right? And so what do I mean by that? So anybody that buys that doesn't know what options are, an option gives you literally the option to buy something at a certain price, and you pay a premium for the optionality to do that, right? So if you think a stock is going higher, you buy an option on that stock, you pay a premium for it, and then you have the right to buy that until that contract expires. And and I'm a student of history, and so one of the things you look at is some of the more successful people throughout history, financially speaking, have been able to find options that don't expire. And so that's initially what attracted me to crypto. When I found NFTs, right, my initial thought was like, oh, this is an option on an option, right? And what do I mean by that, right? So it's like when the stock market is at all-time highs, right? You have a rise in price of all assets, right? Whether it be luxury cars, luxury homes, wine, watches, all these things, because people are now they now have more wealth, so they can spend that money on these different things that they wish to spend them on. And so my thesis was that if a new generation of crypto millionaires and billionaires was born out of a bull market, right? Because I was very bullish on crypto in general, especially at that point. Then they would be spending money in more crypto native ways, and one of them would be NFTs, right? So it's like, I why cash your money out to buy a Lambo? And anybody that was around in the 2017, 2018 cycle, people remember, the meme was when Lambo. And my thesis was when CryptoPunk, right? Like I thought by the end of this cycle, it would be when CryptoPunk, where people wanted to make enough money to buy a digital flex through an NFT as opposed to a physical flex, right? And the reason why, right? And you think about it, is like the scale, right? It's like if let's say at the time, let's say a Lamborghini was about the same price as this CryptoPunk when I bought it, but when I make it my profile picture, thousands of people or millions of people could see it. Whereas if I buy a Lamborghini and I drive it around, it's really like my neighbors and the people I run into, right, that can see it. So it's like when you want to talk about like flexing, and I wrote about it in the terms of the digital flex in that thread, was like this was going to be massive, right? In the sense that that same scale that Twitter, Instagram, that social media in general gives you, in the sense of like showcasing the parts of your life that you want people to see. What is better than being able to see, oh, this person has this picture, that is their profile picture. Oh, I can verify how much they bought it for, right? Because we see this on social media a lot, where somebody will stand in front of a car they don't own. Somebody will rent a jet for like an hour just to take a picture, right? And so it's like, to me, it's like these are things that humans are already doing, that like they would just do on steroids, because you can verify that it's scarce, right? And that really was initially my thought process behind getting into the NFT space, is that it was an option on an option, so that if I was wrong, the most I would lose was all my money. I would lose 100%. But if I was right, I would make the convexity on that, would be hundreds of percent, if not thousands of percentage, in terms of the ROI.
Amazing. I think what we're really starting to thread, and as I'm listening to you, and I've listened to you a lot, and I'm thankful that I get to ask this is about the flex, as you talk about, is really about like luxury and luxury brands, and how the scarcity and the progeny of how blockchain ignites us all in this space is really like a unique moment in time that, like you said, is only going to go forward when people want their and can own digital assets. How are you thinking? So I see you're wearing your 9DCC shirt,
Mhm.
or one of the many of them, and that is a luxury brand. And I've been following it closely. I'm kind of really involved much more in thinking a lot about fashion and crypto and Web3 specifically. So can you talk a little bit about 9DCC and how that came to be for you, and what what you want for your community from 9DCC?
Right. Yeah, no, and I wanna backtrack a little bit right there, right? Because I wanna mention that I personally think that you know, it's not necessarily the luxury or, it's more the scarcity, right? It's like, humans not are into status signaling. Like this is kind of like one of the ways we mate, right? This is the way we interact. This is the way we put ourselves on a pecking order, right? And this is not specific just to humans. This happens in the animal kingdom, right? Like how do you show, like ultimately if you want to get really like behavioral scientific behavior on this is like how do you show that like you're a good mate and that you can pass on your genes, like there are certain things that the opposite sex is looking for, whether you're a bird, a tiger, or a human, right? And so that to me is like when you take a look at like luxury items and scarcity and stuff, it's like a lot of it comes down to signaling, right? And status signaling a lot of times in that hierarchy, right? So I think that that's something that whether we're sitting in front of a computer screen or we're having dinner face to face, that is something that I think is going to exist no matter what, because this is literally just how we're hardwired as biological beings. And so, when you start looking at that, and like, especially as I got into the space, I wanted to start a metaverse fashion brand, like literally from the get go, right? I mean, I remember I spoke to Pranksy and I spoke to a couple other people really early on, sharing my ideas, and ultimately, like, I kind of decided that it was a little too early, right? Is like, if people aren't hanging out in the metaverse, why would they want to buy clothes for the metaverse? So I was like, you know what, I'm not going to go that route yet because I just think that it's too early, but I do think that it's a trend, right? Like it's something that I saw firsthand by playing Fortnite, right? That people will spend money to change their appearance in a video game, right? And that is simple. And so, that to me was my aha moment when I was coming to the space. And then, I was just literally waiting until I felt like it was time, for me and the things that I've been working on, but also like felt like there was enough, let's say, enough demand for it in the space where I could devote more time to it, and ultimately go towards it full time, right? And so like when after the Adidas collaboration happened, which came out in December of 2021, I finally turned to my team and I was like, okay, now we're ready, right? Like I think the space is ready, and I'm ready to go on into this full time, and that's when we really started working on it full time. And there were really three things that I wanted to solve for that, right? One is I wanted to create an aesthetic that I would be proud to wear in the real world, right? So I'm known as gmoney, the crypto punk ape, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Telegram, wherever you talk to me on socials. But that doesn't necessarily mean I want to walk around with a picture of my ape on a t-shirt, right? It's like I have a different aesthetic that I wear in the real world, uh, and I still want to signal that I'm crypto native, because I really felt like uh, at least for me, there wasn't a way that I wanted to signal that I was a crypto native in the real world in an aesthetic that I wanted, right? And that to me is simply like, all right, this is just something that I want. Hopefully, other people will want it as well. So that was one. Two, and along the same vein is, you know, as a consumer of, scarce products, right? Like I am an actual consumer of luxury goods or whatever have you, right? I would like to know, if I'm spending my hard earned money, how many of these exist? Is this one of 100 or is this one of 100,000? Right? Because that obviously affects the resale value, and we know that that's like a huge concern for a lot of people, because the resale market on luxury goods and scarce items is, I think it's approaching 70 billion, and that's just like one small subsegment of it. I don't think that's even counting the vintage market. But like to me, like this is like something that other people want, and it's like it's something that I want. So it's like why not build it? Like there's already a market around this, so why not track it and prove that something is scarce? And then three, and this is where I think things will be getting really fun, and this is what we're working on once the project is out in the wild, is now that you have these assets out there, how do you then take this community building and all this cool stuff that happens on Discord, on Twitter, and now start bringing it into the real world?
100%. I have kids. They buy all sorts of skins in League of Legends and characters on Fortnite. They're very active in that, and at the same time, I am a collector myself. And the idea of this digital first and digital origin it completely makes sense, and you've explained it like super elegantly. I've got so many thoughts right now. I want to pivot slightly and say, so you've got Admit One and 9DCC going strong. What are some other communities that you feel are doing this really well in either the community sense or in the luxury brand sense that maybe are Web3 native? And then the second part of that is, what do you think the Web2 or the kind of brands that are making this transition into Web3 that have the most opportunity for success, and things that you've seen that you admire there? So one is like Web3 native doing well, and the other is Web2-ish. I mean, it's kind of weird to call them Web2. It's just brands that exist now that are moving into Web3 that you also have high hopes for.
Yeah, I think so. Web3 brands that I think are doing a good job. I think Artifact has, they've been obviously paving the way for all of this, which I think that they've been doing amazing stuff, right? I'm very interested to see what they now do under under the umbrella of Nike, and I think that would be really interesting to watch because I think it leads ultimately to more consumer adoption of the tech, which is I think ultimately better for everyone in the space. I think it's interesting because I think ultimately I won't limit this just to luxury brands because I think what we're doing here is we're building communities, right? And like it's funny because people will always compare Admit One to Proof or whatever, but like Kevin he has his vision and he's executing on his vision, and that's very different than like my vision of what I want to be doing, right? And the space, and there's plenty of room for everybody to operate. So like I think I think Moonbirds, I think they're doing great. I think Doodles is doing a great job in the vision that they want to execute. Bored Apes, I think part of the reason we're all, most of the planet is sitting here talking about NFTs today is partly of, what happened with Bored Apes and what Yuga's been able to do. I'm obviously very impartial to CryptoPunks, but that's, it's almost like the community is very organic and is building itself out, right? So that to me is like, I guess from the Web3 brands, I would say it's very traditional in the sense that the blue chips that people talk about. I will add this one. I will say I had a really good conversation this morning with Carlini, who's the founder of Penelope's Country Club, PCC. And I think the way he's thinking about the space and the tech is really, really cool and really forward thinking. And I came away from, like a 1 hour conversation with him with like my head spinning and like really thinking about, oh, like what about this or what about that? And that to me is like one of the most fun things about talking to other people, other Web3 people, because like I could have an idea and we jam back and forth on it for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then maybe that inspires you to think of another idea. And then we jam on that for another 10 or 15 minutes. And like, then all of a sudden, like it could be something off, like something really simple leads to this whole like, oh my God, imagine if this could be done. Like, how do we figure it out? Okay, let's make sure that happens, right? And that to me is like where the disruption comes from, right? Like that's where, when I think about like the two things that I'm trying to do is I want disruption and I want adoption, right? And so disruption is going to come from within. It's coming from the Web3 natives. It's coming from all the communities that I just mentioned. It's coming from the people that are in Discord, on Twitter every day, eating, breathing, and living the tech. And then adoption comes from, partnering with the major brands, right? And they see that there's an opportunity here, right? Like I think on the luxury side, I think Tiffany has probably done the best, I think, out of the gate in terms of building something that people want, right? Like I would have, if you would have told me a year ago that I'd be spending $50,000 on a piece of jewelry, I would have probably called you crazy. And I was like the first one to sign up to buy the pendant of my CryptoPunk, right? And so, I think it's, the collaborative approach, which is what I liked about working with Adidas, right? Is like, it was their idea of like, let's build this together as opposed to let me sell you something, right? And I think that is one of the big things of Web3 is like, how do we build something together and, feel like you have ownership in a brand because we are creating a new class of stakeholders, right? And so like, how do you then empower those stakeholders to become ambassadors for that, for whatever brand, whatever community you're a part of, right? And bringing it out into the real world and showcasing it to their friends. And that to me is like the most exciting part about all of this.
Fantastic. For us at CPG Club or Club CPG and the Builders Club specifically, that how can we help each other feels so deeply entrenched in what we do every day. And it's really inspiring to hear you mention it, especially as, yeah, we don't have all the answers now. Everyone is kind of new at this. And I don't think we have too many experts just yet. And to be able to collaboratively show up the right way and really drive towards an end state is a gift in this time. Because I think for us I think we want to now turn towards community. Like that is, you said stakeholders, and I think is sort of interchangeable with how the communities are built. When we first got on this call, I started to talk with Chad about your manifesto and how I was reading through and reflecting on the 31 points that you make at the bottom. And I said it to Chad, I was like, Chris and Jamie, in this same way of like where their first principles are, what that foundation is of what the environment they want to set, is what attracted me to Club CPG. And I'm 100% confident that the folks that are in Admit One, who you've gone really above and beyond to make sure they were incorporated, that POAP story that we hope we get to of how you created your allow list is all built on the foundation of what you've put forward in those 31 points. When you think about community and you think about how to attract those folks, just tell us a bit more about your mindset there, and how you want to operate in the world, and what some things that you've experienced that in hindsight maybe you're going to want to adjust or double down
Um, yeah, you're talking about in terms of what, like how I plan on onboarding people?
onboarding, and also how you came up with your manifesto and like what the impetus was in sharing
Oh,
it.
yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. And so, when like I said, from when I got into the space, I knew I wanted to start something with fashion, right? And then, as my popularity started growing over time, especially last year, I was like, okay, well, what is the best, most organic way for me to build out my community, uh, and like leave those breadcrumbs out there, right? And that's why, it started off with a 3-day POAP event at Bitcoin Miami in June of 2021. And then that morphed into, okay, like I started handing out POAPs. So, in, I guess, mid to late last year, if you met me, I would have had you scan a QR code, and that acted as a POAP, as like, hey, proof that you met gmoney, right? And then when I first started recording Admit One, which was the cutting edge at the time, right? It was like people that came in and listened live, where they had the ability, like a 5 or 10 minute window, to mint a POAP that they were there, right? And this was like, okay, how do I get people to kind of engage in the community? And then, I never once teased it like, oh, there's going to be value for this long term. You're going to want to collect these. I was just dropping them, and people that wanted to collect them collected them. But that's how I built my allow list for Admit One, right? And so, because I knew, especially by the time that the NFT Admit One dropped, that there would be so much demand for it, right? That like, it would probably get botted. It would probably, there would be, I did, it traded as high as 20 ETH. I never expected it to trade that high. It was very, very humbling, when it did get up there. But, I was like, there would be demand for it. So I needed to find a fair way to distribute it so that I had a good distribution, right? So it's like, to me, it's like, I wanted a fair distribution. I wanted a fair price, right? Which is ended up, ended up giving it away for free. And of those 1,000 NFTs, we have, I think it's 890 something unique wallets, right? So it's like the distribution of that is pretty incredible. I think I think the most one wallet holds is maybe six Admit Ones. And so those were like the things that I wanted to solve for. And that's why I also like didn't want to do a roadmap, because to me, when people release roadmaps, it's because they're trying, I think what ended up happening, and you look at the meta of it, right, is that, okay, people were releasing these 10,000 PFP projects, and then there was so much of it coming out that like the prices wouldn't sustain, right? Because maybe people didn't like the art or whatever, the community, whatever have you. So they're like, oh wait, we're gonna do X, right? We're gonna do X by this date. And so then that would give people that hope of being like, all right, well, if they release a video game and it's the best video game ever, and this is like the main character, then what, people just start, formulating these theses around stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like that is just a bunch of hopium. And me having a finance background, like, I don't necessarily want, like, I understand like that's where like the expected value comes from, not from the art or the community. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to release this manifesto that kind of discusses of, the way I see the world and, the way I operate. I'm not going to tell people that what my road, obviously there's a roadmap. There's things that I'm working towards, but I'm not going to release that publicly because, this is the real world and things get delayed and, whatever have you. And, a lot of times when you're talking to large businesses that don't understand Web3, they're going to take their time, right? And you're not going to be like, hey, Mikey, let's do a project together. And you're like, yeah, let's do it. And like, all right, cool. We drop it in 14 days, right? Like that's just not the way legacy corporations work. And I'm sure you know that as well. And to me, it's like, yeah, this manifesto is kind of like how I live my life so people understand, the guiding principles for me. And that will be hopefully the guiding principles for the community. And that's just how I've been operating with that intent since day one.
It's beautiful. There are so many pieces that are just eloquently and concisely put in there, and it does form the basis of this community. One thing that really comes to mind about specifically the roadmap, I had the opportunity and I was fortunate to go to Converge 22 this past week in SF, and in it, Vitalik came on, and the theme of the opening keynote, because it was put on by Circle, who runs USDC. They were like, we're finally at the stage where speculation is ending and utility is emerging. And I feel like that is a really prescient point for both your approach to the roadmap of like the utility is not in what the next thing is. The benefit to the community is in being in the community and participating and helping it grow. And so I think that it's really speaks volumes that you're having the courage to put this out there. You're holding the line on your community of like, this is what I expect from you. And you've flourished from it. And it's really, a beautiful thing. I do want to touch base really quickly on a POAP. So we have a POAP. So get out your POAP app, because we have, for the next 45 minutes, we have a POAP open for participating in this one. And so if you have your secret word open in POAP, it's gmoney live, all one word, GMONEYLIVE, all lowercase, all one word. Please go mint that. And it might be something in the future. It might not. Might be just that you were here. So please go ahead and do that. In terms of, we've got some time left, and we're going to take some questions from the audience. I've still got a ton more questions. But I think part of what I wanted to really also cover and turn into is we've been talking a lot about subscriptions and how this opportunity for them is coming forward. And I would love to get your take on what your feeling is, because I think it started to resonate with like an option of an option is like there. But some of these business models are also not fleshed out, and some of them are just like, it's a classic business model. What's your thoughts on how communities and subscriptions and or what gets offered starts to take shape in this next phase of Web3, or any other trend that you see in Web3 that's coming forward?
Right. No, I think that that's a really good thought, right? Because, if you want to, and like, I had this thought process when I started it with Admit One, right? It's like, okay, my revenue, right, comes from the secondaries, but I want the people that are part of the community to stay part of the community, right? So in order for me to get some revenue, somebody needs to leave the community. Somebody new is entering the community, but somebody's leaving. And so, I think every business is going to have to do something that is specific towards them, right? So there will be some businesses that make more sense as a revenue model, right? And a lot of times when, especially like a year ago, year and a half ago, my pushback for, let's say, creator tokens, right, was like initially creator tokens were like ERC20s, and like, you know, you own, like, you as the creator would sell like whatever X percentage of that ERC20, and you kept some, right? So that, you know, people would get in and what have you, and people would have to own a certain percent, a certain number of tokens in order to be like at a certain level. And so that to me was like, it didn't necessarily make sense. Like, I think the NFT model made more in the sense that, like, you know, the creator is then incentivized to continue creating value for the NFT community, even if it is like its own creator token, right? It's just a different format of it. Along those same lines, I think subscriptions will be a big thing, right? Like, I'm an investor in Superfluid, which is a streaming subscription thing, a service, right? So that if I am if I am, let's say, Netflix, right, and right now, or let's say I'm a member of Netflix, right, and I pay the $10 a month. If I cancel my Netflix membership, you know, like, I have to wait till whatever my billing date is. I have access until that date, and then I can cancel. But maybe I'm not necessarily using it anymore, or maybe I forget about it or whatever, right? But like, I think in the future, especially with subscriptions, right, is like, you're only going to be paying for access to the second, right? So it's like, if I were to cancel my Netflix subscription, I stop paying right then and there, even though maybe like my monthly date, or since everything is being streamed, you're paying that in real time. So that the second I cancel the subscription, the second I stop paying for it, right? And so then I think that, what does that mean for composability and being able to kind of create financing for that, right? As a business owner, being like, okay, these are like, you know, I have $100,000 worth of ARR, right? Now I can go to a DeFi protocol that can give me a loan against that, and literally it's non-custodial, right? It's like, you know, I can assign those revenues to that lender, which will probably mean I have to pay less in interest, because you don't have that risk of me just running away with the money against your loan. So I think we're like, what has always attracted me to crypto is all these value unlocks that start happening, that maybe happen at the highest ends of the market, in whatever market you are in, because the scale is there in the pricing, but now starts bringing that scale down to the lower end, so that, you know, maybe I only get like $500 worth of ARR because of, you know, I'm just starting my business, but now I can use that like factoring and those financing mechanisms that right now might only be available to the largest corporations in the world, and bring it down to the low end, or the smaller person, so that they can get access to those same tools. So like, you know, I think subscriptions are great. Like, I can't wait to see them proliferate. I think Superfluid is probably one of the leaders in that, in the sense of streaming subscriptions, and I'm really excited to see how that evolves over time as well.
There you have it. I'm furiously taking notes here about it. I hadn't even really considered it from that standpoint, like you said, about how it gets fractionalized and brought all the way down to smaller organizations that couldn't necessarily leverage that. I think that's my biggest insight from this, is like, wow, okay, yeah, we can totally change models, or not models, but change the method in which the value is passed along. How many
Right, which
people are
ultimately,
sharing their
yeah, which
Netflix
ultimately
accounts now?
right, but like, also like, that ultimately leads to cheaper financing, right? Which means that, you know, it increased competition in new businesses proliferating, right? And like, increased entrepreneurship long term. So it's like, again, these are like tools that right now, if I'm running a Fortune 500 company, or, you know, significantly smaller, but like, it's like, even like $100 million company, I have access to all these tools, right? But if I'm a startup and, you know, we're just getting off the ground, I don't have access to those tools until I get to a certain scale, because the due diligence and all like the requirements to kind of set all this up has to hit a certain number, right? But if it's all programmatic, then that number becomes technically like zero, right? Or as close to zero as you could possibly get, which opens up the world for a lot of people that otherwise didn't have access to those tools. And that to me is like ultimately the beauty of crypto, right? Like, the first time I used NFT-Fi, I was like, holy shit. Like, you know, if I have $100 million painting on my wall, it's, yeah, of course I can get a loan against it, right? So I'll find somebody that can give me a loan at a certain percentage LTV and also at a certain interest rate. But if I have $1,000 painting on my wall, like it just like the cost of that transaction isn't worth it in the amount that I can get loaned. But now all of a sudden, if I can post like, you know, my generative art on there as collateral, and maybe it's worth $100, and all I need is a $20 loan for, you know, X amount of time, guess what? Now that tool is now available to me, whereas I didn't have that tool available to me before.
There's a really fascinating case study about how when phones came to specific parts of the world and enabled the economies there, how much everyone was lifted out of it. And I think it gets to the point of like, I think some of the more visionary futurist parts of Web3 are exactly what you're talking about, is like, how can everyone benefit from this, and removing the people, or not the people, but the institutions that, you know, are there for specific reasons for security and safety, but also create so much friction in this that, you know, it doesn't fully flow all the way down. And I think that's a crazy insight that you just dropped. And speaking of kind of crazy insights, or not crazy, but we just started the fourth quarter. It's 2022. The state of the world is absolutely bonkers, and that's saying something considering where we've been the past few years. What are you excited about for getting done by the end of this year? And any sort of like alpha that you want to throw in there. We're always about alpha. And then where do you think the biggest wins will come in Web3 in the next 18 months for that? I always give two-part questions in case you're following along here now. Like,
I know. I gotta remember the first question. I think, you know, with regards to, I obviously I think fashion is one of those, right? Which is why I'm like really delving headfirst into the space. I think the interesting thing that I've seen, you know, I've angel invested in, I think, over 100 projects at this point. And one of the things that I find really encouraging is that we're getting a lot of like Web2 developers, whether, you know, it's backend developers or front end devs, that are coming into the space, and they're coming from like your traditional FANG stocks, which I think, to what you were saying at the top of the show, is that UI needs to get better, right? Like it's, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, my grandmother like didn't know how to use the internet. Today she can, right? And it's like, that's the world that we're headed to over time. And so that's the world that like I'm excited about. And so, you know, I'm very much focused on like Web3 consumer facing things, helping onboard, you know, major brands that will help become advocates and allies, right? That can ultimately push for this decentralized ownership, right? Of, you know, whatever brands are doing, I want them to be doing them on decentralized rails, so that we ultimately have ownership over our assets, right? Like, not these walled gardens where, oh, if I buy this skin in this ecosystem, oh, I can't port that over or even like own it, right? Like that's literally the origin story of Ethereum, right? Where it's like, you know, Vitalik ultimately, he was, I think, playing World of Warcraft. He found like some sort of, I think, glitch or something, had some sort of hack, and then he violated the terms of service, and then he lost all of his assets, right? So it's like, okay, like I understand violating the terms of service and maybe not being able to access that game anymore, but those were like assets that he kind of earned because of like their mistake. And so why shouldn't he have the opportunity to sell that and be like, all right, well, I'm moving on to like the next thing or whatever. He's like, I actually don't own this stuff. And, you know, here we are, whatever, 5, 6, 7 years later with Ethereum, right? And it's like, to me, that people that are building on these things are some of the most interesting stuff that I see coming out there, and increasing that composability, right? And that's why I think we see stuff happening so quickly, is because you're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. And I'll take 90cc as an example, where I have a chip partner, I have a vaulting partner, right? Like I have, you know, a marketplace partner. I'm not building all of this out on my own, because then that would require me hiring all these devs and doing stuff that people have already built. Instead, I'm going to people that I think are best in class and being like, hey, you make the best marketplaces. Okay, let's white label, you know, a marketplace, and let's get that up and running, right? And like, let's do that. And that's where gmoney.market and 90cc.market came from, right? It came from a partner that is creating these white label marketplaces, because ultimately, right, as a brand, I want to control that experience as much as I can, so that one, the user feels comfortable. They know that they're, if you're going to my official marketplace, you're buying the official collection, so you don't need to worry about scam accounts. But then two is like there's a centralized source where you can go for all liquidity or all things G Money, right? And I'm giving you that curated experience that we as humans have been doing for, since forever, especially over the last 100 years, right? As like we live in a curated world where you will walk into a boutique because you like the buyer, you like, the person that selects that selection, you that's something that vibes with you, right? And so to me, it's like, just because we're going digital and decentralized doesn't necessarily mean that the way we've consumed products over the last 150 years is going to change.
Absolutely. I think the large insight, and you reference it again, is like the feelings that are evoked. I'm a big feelings guy. The feelings that are evoked are important to pay attention to. And I think some people sort of forget about how an average participant in the digital economy today has been trained for a very long time. And now this paradigm shift is coming in. We're all like super excited and we want people to try it. But that experience and how people feel in it is super important, and it needs to evolve. And I think that we're getting there, but we're not there. We're going to transition to some questions from the audience. We've got one queued up from Chris Cantino himself, and it's about 90cc. And so he types, as a challenger brand in the fashion industry, what are the biggest challenges you're facing? And how is 90cc positioning itself to turn that space onto Web3?
Right. So I think that, I'm focused on the crypto native, right? I am a crypto native. I want to focus on the crypto native. I think if I were to go out there and, start with like my own, runway show in New York, Paris or Milan or something, I think people would be laughing. They're like, who is this guy? He thinks just because he understands NFTs, he understands fashion, right? But, I have a lot of credibility in the crypto space. And, through real life events, through digital and all these things, right? Like, to me, I want to focus on, my core consumer, who I consider a crypto native, because I am a crypto native. I think that and I know this from my conversations that I've had, is there's a lot of interest from a lot of legacy brands, but they're also like just learning, right? They're at the point where, they're messing around with the idea. They're trying to think of their strategy. And if I was to sit here and wait, like, because again, like the tech exists for a lot of the things that I was doing, but putting an NFC chip on a t-shirt is not revolutionary. It's already been happening. What I think is going to be really cool is how I utilize that tech once it's out in the real world, and then being a way to showcase to these other major brands that are going to move slowly, because they, one, have a lot more to risk, right? Like if you have billions of dollars worth of brand equity, you have to protect that, right? So they have a lot of other things to worry about besides just moving quickly, right? As a crypto native, I can move quickly. I know I'm playing at the edge of the tech, and mistakes are going to happen, and like there will be things that don't work out exactly the way I planned, but the beauty of being a small startup is the nimbleness of it, right? And I plan on playing that to my advantage.
Wonderful. I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of talking with a lot of the folks in the Builders Club, and it comes up constantly, is like, where are you going to drive your wedge? It's like, what part of the community are you going for? And crypto native is this really unique instance of where you can get to a lot of folks that are super passionate and kind of willing to put up with some of the less polished experiences. That doesn't mean you put garbage in front of them,
Right.
but it's a really interesting piece that, like, I think we've debated a bunch of times in the Builders Club, and I find
to that point,
yeah.
right? To that point, right? Because I think there's always that thing of like, do you want to stay crypto native, or like do you do a big deal with like a big brand, right? And so like I mostly say no. I get a lot of offers and a lot of people that are like, oh, we want to partner with you, blah blah blah, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that one, it might not feel like crypto native enough to me, where I'm like, that that to me does, I don't fuck with that vibe. Or two, it's like it's just not on brand for the things that I want to do, right? And so, like, to me, like, what I want to build with 90cc is I want to build a brand that has the same craftsmanship and the same quality as you walking into a Louis Vuitton store, right, and buying like a t-shirt off the shelf there, right? I want that same quality with the stuff that I put out, but then also to signal that I'm a crypto native, right? Because right now that doesn't exist. There's plenty of people in crypto that can go in, walk into any of these stores, buy whatever they want in that store, but it doesn't send that signal out in the real world. You need to send that signal of being a crypto native differently, whether it's having your PFP as your background on your phone, or walking around with like your PFP on your shirt, or the background on your iPhone. There's no way for you to say I am in crypto and I like quality product. They're just not combined at the moment, and I don't think they ever will be, because at least from the legacy world, because they can cater to a crypto native, but because of their legacy and their heritage, they inherently won't be crypto native, right? Like, I firmly believe the next Louis Vuitton, the crypto Louis Vuitton, will be born out of crypto. It won't be coming out of like one of the conglomerates that are coming in to kind of embrace the space, which I think is needed. But like, like, there's new designers born every day, no matter what segment of the market you're in. And I just think that the crypto native version of that will be crypto native.
100%. I feel very privileged to be at this part of the evolution of Web3, because the other thing that I equate it to is like, I'm 42. I remember what it was like in high school to do a book report using a card catalog, and then the next year doing a book report with search in the library, and how vastly different those are. But I have that like defining line in my mind of like, oh yeah, this is how it was and this is how it is now, and they were both had their merits, and now we're moving forward. And it's that same kind of dividing line of like feeling like, okay, maybe I missed getting a punk, not maybe, I definitely did, but I was in this space enough to really see it. And I think that's an important badge to wear. And I fully feel you in terms of being able to signal it. I have a beautiful sweatshirt that was given to me by a Genesis member that has the crypto pills on it from our community. And I wear it, and it has "Wag Me" on the sleeve, just real small, beautifully embroidered. It's a beautiful sweatshirt. And I love that sweatshirt, to the point where people are like, you wear that too much. But anyway, I think that, yeah, we're at a very special moment in time. And I think the approach that you're taking of it, of like, again, crypto native is the focus, is a lot of food for thought for a lot of folks. And I also hear you on like, yeah, somebody's going to come and there's going to be some partnership, and you're like, this just is totally forced, and don't force it. Because there's a lot of damage that can be done from it. So I'm going to turn to some more of the questions here. I'm going to read one from Tim. From the chat. They write, I'm a co-founder of a character brand world that exists on traditional social media. We have 250K plus followers, millions of interactions. We have plushies, phone cases, books. We've been featured and worked with Apple, Instagram, and like you said, love the Doodles roadmap. The question is, do you have any advice on how to bridge or ease an entire fan base that already exists, in our case, 75% females, into the Web3 space?
I've been thinking a lot about this. I think it starts, to be perfectly honest, I think it has to start with some sort of custodial wallet solution, right? Because I've noticed this from handing out so many POAPs to people, where I'll meet somebody, right? And so like, if they scan like my tag or whatever it is, right, it distributes a POAP, right? And so a lot of people have no idea what a POAP is, right? But like, I'll be like, hey, do you want an NFT? And they're like, because like at this point right now, everybody thinks that NFTs are just like, ugly pictures of monkeys, right? And no offense to Bored Apes or anybody that owns them, but like, people just think they're like, pictures of animals, right? And so it's like, okay, how do you start changing that paradigm? And part of it is, right, is like, when you create a wallet, it's at the moment, going back to the UI, it's still a little difficult, right? Like, if you create a wallet on the spot, it's not like, okay, like, I'll use my recovery email and recovery phrase and, figure this out later. Like if you're out and you have to write down like the 12 letters for your wallet, for your seed phrase, and store it in a secure location when you're sitting here just trying to claim a free NFT, like that just doesn't scale. And I think what we should be, and this is kind of why I threw out that tweet the other night, where it's like, who's building white label wallet solutions? And ultimately what I would like to see like somebody do is build out something that is like some sort of maybe custodial solution, where if I don't want to worry about self-custody, I don't have to worry about it. But if I do want to do self-custody, I can. And then have like that option be easily turned on for the second that you want to do it. Because I think when we all come in, we have very little understanding of the technology or what it actually means. But as you go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, you're like, wow, this is really important. So I think that like if you have a huge huge community already from the legacy world, your goal is to kind of onboard them as seamlessly as possible. And that might end up being like some sort of Web 2.5 solution to start, because like you obviously have, a database with, these people's information already, or a good amount of them already. They probably would be open to doing something with you, right? As long as it makes it easy for them, as long as like they don't need to go through as many hoops. And like that to me is one of the things that I try to focus on with the stuff that we do. Is like, I don't want to be creating like 1,000 levels of tiers of how you interact in the ecosystem. I want like, because this is what I want as a consumer. I like good, better, best. Give me like 3 options so that I can choose like I spend X for good, whatever, 2X for better and 3X for best. And that's really simple. Like if I have $10,000 to spend on your product, like show me how to spend it. Like don't make me like go and do like 6 hours of research to figure out how I want to spend this money that I'm ready to spend. And I think that the more we can like make that process easier and more intuitive, then that's really where the onboarding comes. And like that's when we hit that Schelling point of real logarithmic growth.
I love it. There was so much to unpack there, and man, so thankful that you're on this call with us. We are at. I'm going to give a quick time check. I don't know if you have to hard stop at the top of the hour your time. We do have a couple more queued up. I can go over as well. We're happy to.
I can probably. Going. I do have a call at the top of the hour, but I can probably go over by a few minutes.
Okay. Well, let me. We want to circle back to 9DCC, and I think for all of us, we kind of like look at Web3 and we're like, yes, just do it and incorporate it into what you're doing. But specifically for 9DC as a fashion brand, what was your thought process and benefit? And this is for Na H. It's like, what is the specific benefit from the blockchain for 9DCC, and how are you thinking about that going forward? And I think you've sort of covered it, but want to get a little bit more concise on that.
Yeah, so that was really like in like the second pillar that I was trying to solve for, right? Is that verifiable scarcity. So like that when you buy this shirt, right, there's only 1,111 of them in existence, right? And so that like when you go to resell it, or whenever you go, if you want to buy it later on, how scarce it is, right? Like that if it because it's on chain, right? If I make more product, it will show up, right? And so that to me as a consumer was something that I really wanted, right? And then along a little bit of like a deviation from that, or off of that, is like when you take a look at sneaker culture right now, right? It's like, let's say there's a really hype drop, whether it's like a pair of Yeezys, a pair of Jordans, whatever. We can't see what the distribution of that is, right? Because that is all done internally on a database, right? So it's like, one, we might have an idea of how many of those sneakers are produced, but then two is we also don't know, like, did it get botted? Like, is 20% of it owned by one flipper, and that's why the price is going higher? So we don't know. I think by bringing stuff on chain, it gives us a lot more clarity and a lot more visibility into the fairness of something, right? And so along those same lines, what I'm also doing, and when I created the brand, I want people to interact within the ecosystem how they want to interact, right? So first, right, in step one was the actual minting of the NFT. So there were basically three options that people had. One, would they mint the NFT for the size that they wanted to wear? Two, would they mint the NFT for the size that they wanted to flip, to resell? Or three, would they mint the NFT of the art that they liked, right? Because each size is represented by a different photo, which is shot by Justin Aversano, who's a very good friend of mine, right? He was the photo shoot. He was the photographer for the photo shoot for the lookbook. And so that was one, right? Like that was the first step. Now, when delivery comes, right, and the product actually gets fulfilled, you have two options. You can either send it to a vault, at which point it would be vaulted with our vaulting partner 4K, or you would take physical delivery of it. Now, I think the really interesting thing about sending it to the vault is this is something that is already happening in sneaker culture and streetwear culture, in drop culture in general, right? Where people will buy a pair of sneakers, they will have it sitting in their closet until they go to sell it. They'll never wear it, it'll be dead stock, but it's sitting in their closet. So it's like, here we have access to this 24-hour global liquidity marketplace. Why, and you have something that you're never going to wear. Why not put that in a secured custodian that can verify the condition that is in, issue you an NFT, which you can then use, and going back to the conversation that we had earlier, you can then use it on an NFT platform to get liquidity for, right? So it's like if your sneaker is worth $1,000 and you post it as collateral on some NFT lending platform, and I'm like, a sneakerhead, and I'm like, oh, those pair of sneakers in mint condition are worth $1,000. All right, cool. I'll loan you $300 at X% interest rate. And guess what? If you don't pay, I'm more than happy to take delivery of that to either wear them myself, or I now have this asset that I got 70% off. But like that right there is the financialization of this asset class that is a monster asset class already, but is just very immature because none of these financialization instruments exist. Like this exists for real estate, it exists for equities, right? It exists for bonds, it exists for so many mature asset classes out there. But I feel like when you take a look at like, streetwear, sneakers, all these things, like these instruments don't exist because it's really hard, right? Like if I were to sell you something on StockX, the fees are really high. And also like there's no financing mechanism as it exists right now, right? And so like basically we're just kind of like making the world smaller in that sense. And that to me is like, I think super interesting, where I think at some point, I think sneakerheads will be like, all right, well, if I'm never going to wear this stuff, let me just send it to a vault, right? And let's say I have $100,000 worth of sneakers. I now can, without having to sell it, I can still keep my long exposure and get a loan against it. That to me is like mind blowing, right? In terms of like access to products that and financial instruments that people otherwise didn't have.
Where my mind goes on this is, as a collector myself, like I'm not a sneakerhead and I love sneakerheads. But like there's such a rabid base of like Disneyana folks that collect things, or any sort of like avid collectors, and being able to turn that on of like a marketplace and a lending marketplace, I think is just really fantastic. Like eBay has
Like,
tons of dead listings that people are never going to buy, but maybe, they still need to get some liquidity, like you had said, out of it. And the transactions can kind of totally pick back up. And sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I consider the sports cards collectibles market, right? Like along those same lines, right? Like I remember when I first got into NFTs, that was around the time that somebody paid a bunch of money for like, I think it was a Mickey Mantle rookie card. And I'm like, that should be an NFT, right? There's no way that card is sitting like in his home office, right? Because it's so expensive. He's going to put that in a vault. So if you're going to put that in a vault, why not put that in a vault where you get it like an NFT that you can then use as collateral to get a loan against that asset, right? Like
100%.
To me, it's like a no-brainer. And I think that's where the world is headed to over the next decade.
Wow. Well, I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes to close out with anything you want to like say or share. Before we do that, I do have a profound appreciation for the team here at Club CPG, starting with Chris and Jamie, Janet and Chad, the moderators, Buzz, Lou, and Gali. thank you all. Just giving that shout out. They're an amazing team, and none of this is possible without our team. But for you, gmoney, thank you so much for coming on, and the floor is yours, and we'll close it out, and then we'll end that stream.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for having me on. I appreciate you taking the time, and everybody on the team has been very responsive, and including Admit One as well, right? In watching the live stream, so I thought that was really cool, and yeah, really looking forward to continuing the conversation. If anybody has questions, hit me up on Twitter. You know, like this is, I think about this stuff all the time. Like literally, when I go for walks outside in my neighborhood, I'm literally like I bump into people and they're like, "Wait, what are you thinking about?" I'm like, literally just thinking about stuff like this because I'm so excited about it. So, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so much. I'm gonna turn it over to Chad to outro us, and have a great rest of your day. Read that manifesto, take those walks. Thank you, gmoney. Great.
Thank you.